In this video, we will analyze the Loomis head method. It is a widely used technique for drawing some portraits because it is a clear and very effective method. So in this video, we will try to analyze and really understand how it works. But if you want to go even deeper with this technique, I cover it even more with my complete drawing course. You can find the link in the description. But now let's try to understand how this method works. Let's get started. Let's begin our analysis of the proportions, and to do so I suggest starting with a front view of a skull. We will try to analyze the different elements that make up the skull in order to represent it as simply as possible on our drawing sheet. So let's start by studying it from the front. So, when studying the human skull, we can observe that the upper part could be represented by a large circle that encompasses a significant portion of the skull. Therefore, to start our drawing, we could start drawing with this circle. Then, if we look closely, if we look at the skull in more detail, we can notice that the sides of the skull are not circular. Instead, they appear more straight, as if the circle were slightly cut off. If I remove the circle, we can clearly see that the sides actually have rather straight edges. So, to begin, we could construct our face by working with a circle and two relatively straight lines to represent the sides of the skull. And finally, the remaining lower part could be enclosed within a trapezoid, which will complete the overall structure. Now that we have seen how to represent the outlines of our skull using simple shapes, let's go back to the previous model like this one and try to establish relationships between the different elements of the face. These relationships will help us achieve the most accurate drawing possible. These proportions are emphasized by the Loomis method. I'm not inventing anything here, but you will see that they are quite obvious. So let's start by placing this line that divides our circle in half, which corresponds to the eyebrow line. And we could also add a vertical line which would clearly show that it divides the face into two, with a left side and a right side that are symmetrical to each other. So it's also interesting to see that when we look at the skull, it is truly symmetrical on both the right and left sides. Here I have adjusted these lines to ensure they remain well aligned with the ellipse, and we can see that the orange line is equal to the pink line. This means we have the same distance and the same length for these two elements, which will be important for what comes next. Now you can see that I have added two lines to the skull. We have the upper line, which corresponds to the hairline, and the lower line to the nose line. These two lines are equidistant from our eyebrow line, the central line we added earlier. In fact, if we were to divide this pink line into three parts and do the same with the orange line, each of these lines will be positioned approximately at 2/3 of the way, leaving only 1/3 up to the ellipse area. And this is quite interesting to understand because it makes it easier to position the hairline and the eyebrow area and the nose area. We know that the distances between these elements are roughly similar. Of course, this technique is not perfect and will need to be adjusted depending on each individual face. It requires observation. However, simply knowing that the distance from the eyebrows to the nose and from the eyebrows to the hairline is approximately the same can be very helpful in drawing our portrait. Finally, another interesting element we could add is a line for the chin, and the spacing between each of these blue lines will be the same. This could serve as yet another helpful reference point for drawing our portrait. Although in this particular model the distance to the chin is slightly larger, it still provides a useful guideline for constructing a well-proportioned portrait. Now, I suggest we move on to observing the skull in profile. So now let's look at the skull in profile. So we could have a large circle that would encompasses most of the skull area, and then with this yellow line that you can see, we will have the chin in the same manner that what we had for the front face. Next, we have this green circle that I drew, and actually what we notice with this green area is that, well, it corresponds to 2/3 of the surface, and so we will have at the ends of these circles our hairline, then in the middle we will have the eyebrow line, and at the bottom of the circle the nose line. Then we could find our chin line. And once again, we can clearly see that the spacing between each of these elements is the same, meaning there are identical proportions that make it easier to draw the face in profile. Finally, another element that I have added, so we have this yellow vertical line and this slightly curved red line that extends from the intersection of this yellow line and this blue line, which is located in the middle of the green circle. And this red line here, well, would connect to the chin. When we see it on someone's face, and this will be more relevant later, well, it will be the line that helps define the jaw and the areas around the jaw. So this line will be very useful when drawing someone in profile. Now let's move on to the 3/4 view of the head while keeping in mind the green circle we clearly see in profile. When the head was in profile, the circle was fully visible in its entirety. However, as soon as the head shifts to a 3/4 view, the circle no longer maintains its original shape, it flattens and transforms into an ellipse, as we can see here with this model. And this transformation will become even more evident with the tool I am about to show you. This tool is a 3D model of the Loomis head, highlighting all the key elements we previously observed on the skull. It allows us to examine the structure from every possible angle, providing a deeper understanding of its shape and proportion. It's an excellent tool that helps us visualize the different lines and the reference circle from multiple perspectives. Here we see it in profile, but we can also analyze it from the front, 3/4 view, from above, or from below. One thing that stands out is that as we rotate the head to a 3/4 view, whether to the right or the left, the circle we initially identify gradually shrinks and takes on an elliptical shape. Working with this model is particularly insightful because it helps us grasp the head structure and accurately reproduce it on paper. And once we have understood this, as we will practice drawing it from all possible angles to reinforce our understanding. And as we can see, whether we view the head from below, above, or from any other perspective, our reference circle adapts and transforms according to the angle. Now let's see how everything we have learned from this model and the skull study applies to a real human head. Here is the model we are going to study. As we have seen, the head can be enclosed within a large circle that covers most of the face. However, as we also observed with the skull, the sides of the head are relatively straight. Therefore, we could use these green lines to define and emphasize those sides' edges more clearly. Next, we have this blue line that divides the circle in half, which can be associated with the eyebrow area, just as we saw earlier. Similarly, another line positioned higher defines the hairline, while a lower line runs through the middle of the nose. We can also observe that the distance from the eyebrows to the hairline is the same as the distance from the eyebrows to the nose. This corresponds to 2/3, as we had precisely seen with the skeleton. Then we have the chin line. However, in this case, we notice that this man has a slightly wider chin, which slightly alters the proportion. The gap between the chin and the nose is not exactly the same as the one between the eyebrows and the nose, or between the eyebrows and the hairline. Here, the gap is larger. Another interesting element which we hadn't observed until now, but we can clearly see here with the real model, is the presence of these two yellow lines, the eye line and the mouth line. Once again, we will use the rule of thirds. If we divide the space between the eyebrows and the nose into 3 equal parts, the eye line falls at 1/3 of this distance. And the same applies to the mouth, which is positioned at 1/3 of the distance between the nose and the chin, and this provides another valuable reference point for precisely restructuring the face in our drawing. Finally, another helpful guideline is to note that in most cases, if we draw a vertical line from the edge of the nostril, it will align with the corner of the eye. This principle is a great aid in correctly positioning facial features. Of course, this rule isn't absolute and can vary slightly from person to person, but it remains an excellent reference point. If the eyes appear too far apart in relation to the nostrils and this alignment doesn't match, it might indicate a proportional issue. Similarly, we can draw another line starting from the iris, which will roughly align with the corners of the mouth. Again, this reference point helps us properly structure the face and avoid placement errors. And finally, here's a summary of everything we have covered so far with the photo of this man. You may notice that I haven't drawn the shape of the chin, but that was the most straightforward part. Naturally, when drawing people, we won't always find a model where every feature aligns perfectly according to the Loomis head proportions, with elements, for instance, positioned exactly at 2/3. Every individual has unique proportions and these guidelines should be adapted to the real-life subject. However, they serve as a solid foundation on which we can rely before adjusting details based on the specific characteristic of the face in front of us. Now let's compare this model with the Loomis head and examine the differences between them. If we compare this man to the Loomis head, we can see that it generally aligns quite well with the model's guideline. I randomly chose this man from the internet, yet we can still observe that the structure of his skull fits fairly well within the base circle with relatively straight sides. The eyebrow line roughly matches the one in the Loomis head, as do the hairline and the chin line. However, a noticeable difference appears at the level of the nose. In this man's case, the nose line does not align perfectly with the Loomis model's nose line. As a result, the distance between his nose and chin is greater compared to the proportions in the Loomis framework. Despite this variation, using the Loomis method to draw this portrait would have been a great advantage. It serves as a valuable tool to structure the face and provides a strong foundation upon which adjustments can be made to match the specific proportions of the subject being drawn. If you are enjoying this video, know that there are many more waiting for you. On my website, you will find dozens of hours of real-time drawing lessons. We cover all the main topics, the fundamentals to get started, portraits, the human body, animals, and perspective to build entire scenes. Each tutorial is guided from start to finish, as if you were drawing right by my side. You will learn how to correct your mistakes, how to gain precision, and give more strength to your drawings. So if you want to improve and explore all these drawing courses, click on the link in the description. Otherwise, let's get back to this video. Here is our model in profile view. Once again, we could enclose most of the head within a large circle with an additional area for the chin. Inside this main circle, another smaller circle could represent approximately 2/3 of the total surface. From this circle, we could draw 3 guiding lines: the hairline, the eyebrow line, and the nose line, maintaining a relatively even spacing between them, even though the spacing between the eyebrow and the nose may be a little bit bigger. Next, we could add the chin line, and with all these elements, we can see that the elements are quite proportionate and quite balanced, and more than what we observed with the male model, resulting in a more balanced structure for this woman. The spacing between all these blue lines is relatively the same. Finally, we can identify the eye and mouth lines, positioned at 1/3 of the distance from either the nose line or the eyebrow line, just as we saw before. To refine the structure further, I have added a final red line, which we previously discussed with the skull study, serving as a useful guide for properly shaping the jawline in our drawing. And so that's it for our female model. And now let's see a last one with the 3/4 view model. And finally, here is our 3/4 view model. As we can see, the skull, just like before, could be enclosed within this large purple circle. However, for the green circle, this time we don't have a perfect circle. We have an ellipse which better represents the slightly flattened side of the skull. We notice that the vertical line remains straight, but the horizontal line is now tilted diagonally, unlike what we observed in previous view. Another interesting detail which we hadn't mentioned earlier is that the ear is generally positioned in the lower left or right corner, depending on the person's orientation. Additionally, our blue construction lines are no longer perfectly straight. Instead, they follow a curvature that aligns with the rounded shape and tilt of the face. I must admit, since I am not a Photoshop expert, making these curved lines perfectly smooth was a bit tricky, but the main concept is still clearly illustrated. And we can see that the spacing between these different blue lines is pretty more balanced, and we can see that the spacing is almost the same, and it could be the same also if we added the chin line. And also the same would apply we could follow the same rules that what we see before, with the line of the eyes and the line of the mouth being placed at approximately 1/3 of the distance. And so this concludes our analysis. I know this was a lot of information, but I believe it was essential to go through all of it to fully understand the Loomis method. Now, if you want to go further with the Loomis method and with your drawings, feel free to click the link in the description to get access to dozens and dozens of drawing tutorials. So thank you very much for watching, and see you very soon with another tutorial.